In a universe filled with prophecy and divine mystery, a sanctuary not crafted by human hands whispers secrets that stretch across the ages. This sacred place, the heart of a cosmic struggle and redemption, draws us into the ancient world of Daniel 8. From the clash of mighty beasts to a horn of enigmatic power, the symbols and stories are not mere relics of the past, but resonate with profound truths for all humanity. They guide us on a journey through time, connecting earthly struggles with heavenly purposes. This is a tale of faith, history, and destiny, a path to understanding carved by the divine and trod by prophets. Join us as we embark on an exploration of Daniel 8, where the celestial sanctuary becomes the stage for a prophecy that reaches into the very soul of existence. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. One distinguished attribute of the Holy Scriptures, a trait that forever inoculates them against accusations of mere fabrication, is the candid and unreserved manner in which their authors recount all the circumstances of the events they chronicle. In verse 1, the exact timing of Daniel's vision is faithfully stated. The commencement of Belshazzar's reign occurred in 540 BC, which indicates that the 3rd year of his reign, the year in which this vision was granted to Daniel, would be 538 BC. Considering that Daniel was approximately 20 years old when he was taken to Babylon in the inaugural year of Nebuchadnezzar in 606 BC, he would be about 88 years old at this point. The vision he alludes to, identified as the one which first appeared unto him, is most likely the vision from the 7th chapter, which he received in the 1st year of Belshazzar's reign. And I saw in a vision. And it came to pass, when I saw, that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. As the verse delineates the temporal circumstances of the vision's impartation, this passage illuminates the geographical context in which the prophet was graced with divine revelation. Shushan, the capital of the province of Elam, was presently under Babylonian rule, with a royal palace of the Babylonian king resplendently situated within its bounds. As a state minister engaged in the king's affairs, Daniel found himself in this very locale. Abradates, the viceroy of Shushan, pledged his loyalty to Cyrus, subsequently amalgamating the province with the Medes and Persians. Consequently, and in line with the prophecy of Isaiah 20, Macedonia, was instructed by the oracle to select the goats as his guides to dominion. Subsequently, observing a herd of goats fleeing from a severe storm, he tracked them to Edessa, establishing his empire there, adopting the goats as his emblems or standards, and naming the city Aegae, or the goats' town, and its inhabitants Aegaeidae, or the goats' people. The city of Aegae, or Aegae, served as the customary burial site of the Macedonian monarchs. Moreover, it is noteworthy that Alexander's progeny with Roxana was named Alexander Aegus, or the son of the goat, and some of Alexander's successors are portrayed on their currency with the horns of a goat. The goat originated from the west, covering the face of the entire earth. This signifies that Greece, situated west of Persia, launched its assault from that direction. The Greek military swept all before it in a wave of conquest. The goat did not touch the ground. Such was the astounding swiftness of its maneuvers that it seemed to flutter from one location to the next with the velocity of the wind. This same trait of rapidity is conveyed by the four wings of the leopard in Daniel's vision in chapter 7, which also represents this nation. Alexander as the prominent horn. The conspicuous horn nestled between his eyes is clarified in verse 21 to be the inaugural king of the Macedonian Empire. This king was Alexander the Great. A succinct recounting of the overthrow of the Persian Empire by Alexander is provided in verses 6 and 7. The conflicts between the Greeks and the Persians were said to be exceedingly ferocious. Some historical records vividly conjure the image depicted in the prophecy: a ram standing before the river, and the goat rushing towards him in the fury of his power. Alexander initially defeated Darius's generals at the river Granicus in Phrygia. He subsequently attacked and vanquished Darius at the passes of Issus in Cilicia, and later triumphed over him on the plains of Arbela in Syria. This final battle took place in 331 BC and marked the downfall of the Persian Empire. With this victory, Alexander assumed control over the entire nation. Regarding verse 6, he, the goat, approached the ram that bore two horns, which I had observed standing before the river, and charged at him in the fury of his power. Thomas Newton posits, one can scarcely read these words without conjuring an image of Darius's army steadfastly guarding the river Granicus, and of Alexander on the opposing bank with his forces diving into the waters, swimming across the river, and hurling themselves upon the enemy with all the vigor and fervor one could conceive. Ptolemy commenced the reign of Alexander in 332 BC, but it was not until the Battle of Arbela the following year that Alexander became the indisputable lord of that empire, claiming the utmost extent ever achieved by any of the Persian kings. On the eve of this decisive battle, Darius dispatched 10 of his most distinguished relatives to negotiate peace. When they presented their terms to Alexander, he is reputed to have retorted, "Heaven cannot harbor two sons, nor the earth two masters." Verse 7's rhetoric underscores the absolute subjugation of Medo-Persia by Alexander. The two horns were shattered, and the ram was hurled to the ground and trampled upon. Persia was subdued, its lands ravaged, its armies slaughtered and dispersed, and its cities pillaged. The royal city of Persepolis, the Persian Empire's capital, and a marvel of the world, even in its ruinous state, was sacked and incinerated. Thus, the ram had no power to resist the goat, and none could deliver him from his grasp. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. The vanquisher invariably ascends above the vanquished. The ram, emblematic of Medo-Persia, achieved a stature of greatness. The goat, representing Greece, ascended to a level of very greatness. When he was strong, the great horn was broken. Contrary to the conjectures of human foresight, one might surmise that when he becomes frail, his kingdom beset by insurrection or diluted by decadence, then the horn will fracture and the kingdom will crumble. However, Daniel perceived it fractured in its prime, at the zenith of its power, when every onlooker would have proclaimed, "Certainly, the kingdom is secure and no force can topple it." Such is the fate of the wicked often. The horn of their might is fractured when they deem themselves most steadfast. The scripture cautions, Let him that thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. 1 Corinthians 10:12. The emergence of 4 notable horns. Following Alexander's demise, a significant dispute erupted among his followers concerning the succession. After a 7-day contest, it was agreed that his natural brother, Philip Aridaeus, should be declared king. Through him, and Alexander's infant sons, Alexander, Agus, and Hercules, the semblance of the Macedonian Empire was maintained for a period. However, the young boys were soon assassinated, and Alexander's lineage was extinguished. Subsequently, the principal commanders of the army, who had dispersed across the empire as provincial governors, assumed the title of king. They immediately began waging wars against one another, reducing their number to 4 within a few years of Alexander's death, matching the precise number prophesied. 4 distinguished horns were to ascend toward the 4 winds of heaven, replacing the great horn that had fractured. These were Cassander, who controlled Greece and the adjacent territories; Lysimachus, who governed Asia Minor; Seleucus, who held sway over Syria and Babylon, giving rise to the line of kings known as the Seleucidae, renowned in history; and Ptolemy, son of Lagus, who ruled over Egypt, and from whom emerged the Lagidae. These rulers held dominion toward the 4 winds of heaven. Cassander governed the western regions, Lysimachus the northern territories, Seleucus the eastern provinces, and Ptolemy the southern part of the empire. Hence, these 4 horns may be designated as Macedonia, Thrace, which at that time encompassed Asia Minor, along with the regions bordering the Hellespont and the Bosphorus, Syria and Egypt. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. The prophetic narrative introduces a third influence, a power less definitively characterized than the ones representing Medo-Persia and Greece. 2 prevailing interpretations are commonly proposed. The first posits that the little horn signifies the Syrian king, Antiochus Epiphanes, while the second proposes it to be the Roman Empire. Both interpretations can be evaluated by assessing their conformity to the prophetic account. Does Antiochus Epiphanes represent the little horn? The prophecy indicates that the little horn emerged distinctively from one of the goat's 4 horns. Was Antiochus such an entity? If we examine the historical backdrop, we find that from the moment Seleucus claimed the Syrian portion of Alexander's domain as his own kingdom, a sequence of 26 monarchs ruled this territory until its subjugation by Rome. Antiochus Epiphanes was the 8th in this line. Hence, it's implausible to consider him as a separate horn. He was temporarily the Syrian horn itself. Should the little horn refer to any of these Syrian monarchs, logic suggests it would be the most influential among them. However, Antiochus Epiphanes, despite his self-adopted title, the Illustrious, was far from being the most potent Syrian ruler. As historical texts reveal, his antics were so egregious that his name was transformed from Epiphanes, the Illustrious, to Epimanes, the Madman. Following a defeat by the Romans, Antiochus the Great, father of Epiphanes, was compelled to surrender part of his domain and offer his son as a hostage to secure a peace agreement. Thereafter, Roman dominance was maintained. The prophecy describes the little horn as becoming exceedingly great, but this can hardly be attributed to Antiochus Epiphanes. His limited territorial gains in Egypt were soon relinquished under Roman pressure, and his frustrated ambitions were exacted on the innocent Jewish population. The prophecy's narrative indicates that the little horn was destined to resist the Prince of Princes, undeniably referring to Jesus Christ. Since Antiochus died over a century before Christ's birth, it's clear that he cannot fulfill this prophecy. The question arises, why do some consider Antiochus as the embodiment of the prophecy? The answer likely lies in religious bias. Some Roman Catholics interpret the prophecy in this way to deflect its application to their own tradition, while some Protestants do so in opposition to imminent Second Advent doctrines. Is the little horn emblematic of Rome? The symbolic depiction of the little horn aligns seamlessly with Rome's historical narrative, where it appears as the succeeding power after Greece. As the prophetic vision encompasses the same geopolitical space covered by Nebuchadnezzar's image in Daniel 2 and the vision in Daniel 7, the fourth significant power following Greece is, unmistakably, Rome. It's true that Rome, despite its vastness, had no direct interaction with the Jewish people, the chosen people of God at that time, until the formation of the Jewish League in 161 BC. However, Rome had already absorbed Macedonia 7 years prior, which is why the prophetic vision portrays it as emerging from one of the goat's horns. The description of the little horn extending its influence towards the southeast and the pleasant land aligns with Rome's historical conquests of Egypt, Syria, and Judea. Additionally, Rome's persecution of God's people and their religious leaders, its prideful defiance of the Prince of the Host, referring to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, its transition from paganism to papacy, and its suppression of truth to the ground, all make it an apt symbol for the little horn. Rome fits every specification of the prophecy where no other power does. Therefore, it's logical to identify the little horn as none other than Rome, as historical events have strikingly and accurately fulfilled the prophecies concerning this entity. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spoke, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. The concluding lines of Daniel 8 offer the final flourish to the vision proper. The scripture introduces a matter of supreme interest to both the prophet and the church, the time period during which the desolating powers, previously delineated, would persist. The question that begs asking is, how long will these forces exert their oppressive rule over God's followers? Had an opportunity arisen, it's plausible that Daniel would have posed this question himself. However, in his divine wisdom, God often preemptively satisfies our queries, sometimes providing answers even before the question is fully formed. The gravity of this subject is highlighted by a dialogue between two heavenly beings. This matter requires thorough comprehension by the church. Daniel bore witness to one saint's discourse, though the specific content of this conversation is left undisclosed. Yet, another saint poses a significant question. How long shall be the vision? The presence of both this question and its response in the record signifies the importance of the Church's understanding of this issue. This interpretation is further reinforced by the fact that the answer was directed at Daniel as the primary party concerned, thus signifying the specific relevance of the information to him. The prophecy identifies a specific time frame, the 2300 days, as pronounced by the angel, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. What constitutes the daily? A robust case can be made, based on verse 13, that the term sacrifice is an ill-suited extrapolation to associate with the term daily. If we were to interpret this as referencing the discontinuation of the daily sacrifice of Jewish observance, a ritual indeed terminated at a specific historical moment, the resulting question, how long shall be the vision concerning it, lacks logical coherence. Clearly, this query implies that the agents or events under discussion span a significant stretch of years. The essence of this dialogue is the passage of time. The entire duration of the vision is consumed by the so-called daily and the transgression of desolation. Consequently, the daily cannot refer to the Jewish daily sacrifice as the moment of its cessation at the splitting of the temple veil during Christ's crucifixion occupies a mere instant. The daily must therefore symbolize a phenomenon extending across a substantial period of years. In the Old Testament, the term translated as daily appears 102 times according to the Hebrew Concordance. More often than not, it is interpreted as continual or continually. The concept of sacrifice is not intrinsically linked with this term, nor does the text contain any explicit reference to sacrifice. Such an interpretation has been inserted by translators to reflect their comprehension of the text, an understanding that seems flawed, given that Jewish sacrifices are not the focus here. It is more plausible, based on both linguistic structure and context, to surmise that the term daily alludes to a destructive power akin to the transgression of desolation with which it is associated. Consequently, we discern two destructive forces that subject the church to prolonged desolation. A literal translation of the text might read, "How long shall be the vision concerning the continuance and the transgression of desolation?" Here, desolation is linked to both continuance and transgression, as though the full expression were the continuance of desolation and the transgression of desolation. The continuance of desolation, or the perpetual desolation, is interpreted as a reference to paganism throughout history. Recognizing the extensive epochs over which paganism has been a prime instrument of Satan's opposition to God's earthly work, the aptness of the term continuance or perpetual becomes evident. Similarly, the transgression of desolation is understood to signify the papacy. The phrase employed to characterize this latter force is more potent than that used for paganism. It is the transgression or rebellion, as another interpretation offers, of desolation, suggestive of an epoch during which the desolating force rebels against all constraints previously imposed. In religious terms, these two forms of antagonism against God's work on earth have dominated the world. Thus, although three earthly governments are presented in the prophecy as oppressors of the church, they are classified under two principal headings: the daily and the transgression of desolation. Medo-Persia was pagan, Greece was pagan, Rome in its initial phase was pagan. These all fall under the daily. Following these is the papal form, the transgression of desolation, a masterpiece of duplicity and cunning, the embodiment of inhumanity. It is hardly surprising that generations of suffering martyrs have cried out, "How long, O Lord, how long?" It is equally understandable that the Lord, to prevent hope from being extinguished in the hearts of his oppressed followers, has provided glimpses into future world events. All these persecuting powers will ultimately face utter and eternal annihilation. For those redeemed, there are enduring glories beyond the afflictions and sorrows of this transient life. God's watchful eye is upon his people. The furnace will only burn as fiercely as necessary to purge the impurities. We are to enter the kingdom through abundant tribulation. The term tribulation originates from tribulum, a threshing sledge. Successive blows must strike us until all the wheat is freed from the chaff, preparing us for the heavenly granary. However, rest assured, not a single kernel of wheat will be lost. Thus speaks the Lord unto his chosen. Ye are the light of the world, the salt of the earth. Through his gaze, all else on this earthly realm pales into insignificance. Hence the peculiar inquiry, how long? The vision concerning the daily and transgression of desolation. What is this pertaining to? Is it concerning the splendor of terrestrial kingdoms, the prowess of celebrated warriors, the renown of formidable conquerors, the grandeur of human empire? No, instead it pertains to the sanctuary and the host, the congregation, and worship of the Almighty. The question posed is, how long will they remain subjugated? Herein lies the focus of heavenly interest and empathy. He who assails God's people does not merely challenge mortals, feeble and defenseless, but directly confronts omnipotence. He initiates a reckoning destined for resolution in the celestial court. Soon, all such accounts will be balanced and the oppressive weight will be shattered. A populace, forged and tempered in the crucible of suffering, will emerge, destined to shine as eternal stars. Each child of God is a focus of heavenly regard, beloved by the Lord, who prepares for each an immortal crown. Dear viewer, do you count yourself among their number? There is no insight within this chapter concerning the 2300 days, introduced for the first time in verse 14. Consequently, we must momentarily set aside this period. Nonetheless, let the reader be assured, we are not left in ambiguity regarding these days. The proclamation about them forms part of a revelation designed for the edification of God's people. and it is intended for comprehension. The 2300 days are mentioned amidst a prophecy which Gabriel, the angel, was commanded to elucidate for Daniel. Gabriel duly fulfilled this instruction, as will be revealed upon examining the ensuing chapter. What constitutes the sanctuary, conjoined with the 2300 days, is another subject of equal significance: the sanctuary. Inextricably linked with this is the matter of its purification. Upon investigating this issue, the necessity of comprehending the initiation and conclusion of the 2300 days will be revealed to discern the timing of the momentous event known as the cleansing of the sanctuary. All inhabitants of the earth, as will be unveiled in due course, have a personal stake in this solemn undertaking. Various interpretations exist regarding the nature of the sanctuary, such as the earth, the land of Canaan, the church, and the heavenly sanctuary, the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched, and not man, which resides in the heavens, and which served as a prototype for the Jewish tabernacle, Hebrews 8, 1, 2, 9, 23, 24. The validity of these diverging views can only be adjudicated by the scriptures. Fortunately, the testimonial evidence is neither sparse nor equivocal. It cannot be the earth. The term sanctuary features 144 times in both the Old and New Testaments. Lexicographers' definitions and biblical usage indicate it refers to a holy or consecrated place, a dwelling place for the Most High. Should the earth be the sanctuary, it must fulfill this criteria. Yet, which of its qualities aligns with this definition? The earth is neither holy nor sacred, nor is it the abode of the Most High. It bears no distinctiveness from other celestial bodies, save for being a rebellious planet, marred by sin, scarred and withered by the blight of transgression. Furthermore, nowhere within the scriptures is the earth designated as the sanctuary. A solitary text can be invoked in its favor, albeit through an unreasonable extrapolation. The glory of Lebanon shall come unto thee, the fir tree, the pine tree, and the box together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary, and I will make the place of my feet glorious. Isaiah 60:13. This passage undoubtedly refers to the renewed earth, yet even here it is not termed the sanctuary, but merely the place of the sanctuary, much like the place of the Lord's feet. This phrasing possibly signifies God's perpetual presence among his people, as it was unveiled to John. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. Revelation 21:3. Thus, all that can be affirmed of the earth is that once rejuvenated, it will serve as the location for God's sanctuary. It cannot assert any claim to being the sanctuary at present, nor the sanctuary prophesied by Daniel. The assertion that Canaan fulfills the status of the sanctuary based solely on the word's definition seems equally implausible as the notion that the earth itself embodies that distinction. If one searches the sacred scriptures for instances where Canaan is explicitly designated as the sanctuary, only a smattering of passages may be offered which some perceive as supplying sufficient substantiation. Notably, Exodus 15:17 serves as a primary testament, where Moses, in his hymn of exultation and gratitude to God after the crossing of the Red Sea, exclaims, "Thou shalt bring them in, and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established." In this instance, Moses foresees a prophecy, and his language signifies an anticipation of God's future benevolence towards his people. It behooves us to explore the fulfillment of his prophecy. We turn to the verse penned by David, who retells the tale of Moses' prophecy as historical fact, Psalm 78, 53, 54. He recounts the emancipation of Israel from Egyptian bondage and their subsequent establishment in the Promised Land, declaring, "He, God, led them on safely so that they feared not, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies, and he brought them to the border of his sanctuary, even to this mountain, which his right hand had purchased." It becomes evident that the mountain David refers to mirrors the mountain of thine inheritance mentioned by Moses, upon which God's people were destined to be planted. However, David does not label this mountain as the sanctuary, but merely the border thereof. If that be the case, what then is the sanctuary? A subsequent verse within the same psalm provides an answer. He built his sanctuary like high palaces, like the earth which he hath established forever. Psalm 78:69. This same distinction between the sanctuary and the land is echoed in the prayer of the virtuous King Jehoshaphat. Art not thou our God, who did drive out the inhabitants of this land before thy people Israel, and gave it to the seed of Abraham thy friend forever? And they dwelt therein, and have built thee a sanctuary therein for thy name. 2 Chronicles 20:7-8. It might seem tempting when interpreting Exodus 15:17 in isolation to infer that Moses identifies the mountain as the sanctuary. However, upon integrating David's account, which substantiates the prophecy of Moses and offers divinely inspired interpretation, such a notion quickly evaporates. David unequivocally articulates that the mountain was merely the border of the sanctuary, and that within that boundary or land, the sanctuary was built as lofty palaces, an allusion to the magnificent temple of the Jews, the nucleus and emblem of all their worship. An attentive reader of Exodus 15:17 will discern that Moses did not, even implicitly, suggest that the sanctuary denoted the mountain of inheritance, let alone the entirety of Palestine. Moses seamlessly transitions from one concept or subject to the next in his poetic liberty, first focusing on the inheritance, then God's dwelling within it, and finally the sanctuary he would construct therein. This is analogous to David's conjunction of Mount Zion and Judah in Psalm 78:68, due to the location of Zion within Judah. The three verses, Exodus 15:17, Psalm 78:54-69, form the backbone of the argument, suggesting that Canaan represents the sanctuary. Intriguingly, the latter two verses, in their plain language, clarify the ambiguity of the former, thus refuting the claim based on it. We offer one final consideration regarding the earth or the land of Canaan as the sanctuary. If either were to serve as the sanctuary, not only should it be portrayed as such somewhere in the scripture, but this interpretation should be consistent to the end, with the cleansing of the earth or Palestine described as the purification of the sanctuary. The earth, indeed tainted, is destined for purification through fire. However, as we shall later explore, fire is not the tool utilized in the cleansing of the sanctuary. Nowhere in the scriptures is the earth's purification, or any part thereof, referred to as the cleansing of the sanctuary. As for the notion that the church forms the sanctuary, the solitary verse often cited to substantiate this idea is Psalm 114:1-2. When Israel went out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange language, Judah was his sanctuary and Israel his dominion. If we interpret this passage literally, it would suggest that the sanctuary is confined to one of the 12 tribes, implying that only a fragment of the church, not the entirety, constitutes the sanctuary. However, the reason Judah is referred to as the sanctuary in the given verse need not be perplexing, for it is Judah that God selected as the site of his sanctuary. As David asserts, but chose the tribe of Judah, the mountain Zion which he loved, and he built his sanctuary like high palaces, like the earth which he hath established forever. Psalm 78:68-69. This distinctly illustrates the link between Judah and the sanctuary. It is not that the tribe itself was the sanctuary, but it is denoted as such on the occasion of Israel's exodus from Egypt, as God intended for his sanctuary to reside amidst Judah's territory. Should it be demonstrated that the church is ever referred to as the sanctuary, it would bear no relevance to our current endeavor. Our objective is to discern what embodies the sanctuary referenced in Daniel 8:13-14, for the church is indicated in the text as a distinct entity. To give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. The term host undoubtedly represents the people of God. Hence, the sanctuary must signify something other than the church. Our attention now turns to the solitary remaining contention, that the sanctuary in the text corresponds to the one depicted in Hebrews 8:1-2. This sanctuary, identified as the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched and not man, is explicitly denoted as the sanctuary and is situated in the heavens. A tangible likeness of this celestial sanctuary once existed, initially in the form of the tabernacle constructed by Moses and later as the Jerusalem temple. Permit us to envisage this matter through Daniel's perspective. What would he interpret by the term sanctuary? Upon hearing this term, his thoughts would inevitably gravitate towards his people's sanctuary, a location of which he was distinctly aware. He certainly contemplated Jerusalem, his ancestral city lying in ruins, and their beautiful house, tragically consumed by fire, as Isaiah mourns in Isaiah 64:11. Consequently, with his countenance directed towards the site of their once revered temple, Daniel implores God to let his countenance illuminate his desolate sanctuary. Clearly, he equated sanctuary with the Jerusalem temple. The scripture furnishes irrefutable testimony regarding this matter. Then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary. Hebrews 9:1. What did the sanctuary of the first covenant comprise? The subsequent verses elucidate. It describes the earthly tabernacle erected by Moses, later absorbed into the Jerusalem temple, equipped with a holy and most holy space and assorted service items, as explained in Hebrews 9:2-5. The meticulous depiction of this structure, including the sacred artifacts and their functions, can be found in Exodus 25 and onwards. Evidently, this was the sanctuary of the first covenant. By clarifying what encompasses the sanctuary, the book of Hebrews sets a definitive course for our inquiry. It offers a well-defined and comprehensively detailed object for consideration, which was meticulously delineated by Moses and proclaimed in Hebrews as the sanctuary throughout the era of the first covenant, extending to Christ's days. Moreover, this passage in Hebrews possesses even greater import. It effectively obliterates the arguments asserting that the sanctuary could be the earth, the land of Canaan, or the church. Any argument positing one of these as the sanctuary at any point would, by extension, declare it as such under ancient Israel. If Canaan was ever the sanctuary, it would have been so when Israel was established there. If the church was ever the sanctuary, it was so when Israel was liberated from Egypt. If the earth was ever the sanctuary, it would have been during this same period. But was any of these the sanctuary at that time? The unequivocal response is no. The authors of Exodus and Hebrews provide a detailed description, stating that not the earth, not Canaan, not the church, but the tabernacle erected by Moses and later replaced by the temple was the sanctuary of Old Testament times. The architectural marvel of this edifice adheres meticulously to the designated term and its purposed utilization, the terrestrial abode of divinity. As God proclaimed to Moses, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." Exodus 25:8. God's presence was perceptibly manifested in this meticulously constructed tabernacle. It was a consecrated space, a holy sanctuary, as depicted in Leviticus 16:33. In the divine scriptures, it is recurrently identified as the sanctuary. As among the more than 130 instances of the term's usage in the Old Testament, the overwhelming majority refers to this structure. Initially, the tabernacle was crafted to cater to the nomadic lifestyle of the Israelites at that epoch. As they embarked on their 40 years of wilderness wandering, this sanctuary emerged as a divine abode and a religious epicenter. Given the obligatory peregrinations, the tabernacle was designed to be mobile. The structural integrity of upright boards and a covering of linen and dyed skins allowed it to be swiftly dismantled, conveniently transported, and reassembled at each subsequent station of their journey. With the eventual settling in the Promised Land, this transient structure yielded to the more permanent and magnificent Temple of Solomon. This transformed form of the sanctuary endured, save for the brief intervals of ruin during Daniel's time, until its ultimate devastation by the Romans in AD 70. This earthly sanctuary remains the sole entity of its kind within biblical chronicles. However, is there no other in existence? This terrestrial sanctuary corresponds to the first covenant, which expired with it. Is there no counterpart for the second or new covenant? There should be, for without it, an analogy would not exist between the two covenants. Absence of such a counterpart would render the detailed description of the worship system of the first covenant indecipherable, while the worship system of the second covenant would remain vague and undefined. The author of Hebrews implicitly states that the new covenant, active post the death of Christ, the testator, possesses a sanctuary. As Hebrews 9:1 distinguishes the first covenant for its ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary, it suggests that the new covenant also boasts its own services and sanctuary. Furthermore, verse 8 in the same chapter terms the earthly sanctuary as the first tabernacle, indicating a subsequent or second one. Just as the first tabernacle existed for the duration of the first covenant, the second tabernacle must have succeeded it as the sanctuary of the new covenant. This inference is irrefutable. Where then should we seek the sanctuary of the new covenant? The word also in Hebrews 9:1 hints at a previously mentioned sanctuary. Backtracking to the preceding chapter's onset reveals a summarization of prior arguments, stating, "Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest, who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man." Could there be any doubt that this text describes the sanctuary of the new covenant? It subtly alludes to the sanctuary of the first covenant. While the former was constructed by human hands, specifically Moses, the latter was crafted by God himself. The former served as a ministerial site for earthly priests, while the latter serves Christ, the high priest of the new covenant. The former resided on earth, the latter in heaven. Thus the former was aptly termed a worldly sanctuary, and the latter a heavenly one. This perspective is fortified by the recognition that the sanctuary constructed by Moses wasn't a novel structure, but was modeled after a pre-existing prototype. God's instructions to Moses emphasize this aspect. "According to all that I show thee, after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall you make it." Exodus 25:9. "Look that thou make them after their pattern, which was showed thee in the mount." Verse 40. So what does the terrestrial sanctuary symbolize or represent? It's a figure or type of the sanctuary of the new covenant, the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man. The first covenant serves as a type to the antitype of the second. The sacrifices of the first covenant foreshadow the more significant sacrifice of the new covenant. Its priests are emblematic of our Lord in his superior priesthood. Their ministerial service prefigures the ministerial service of our high priest above. The sanctuary where they ministered is a model or figure of the true sanctuary in heaven, where our Lord conducts his ministry. The irrefutable elucidations found within Hebrews unambiguously articulate. If he, Christ, were on earth, he should not be a priest, observing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law, who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was cautioned by God when he was about to construct the tabernacle. "For see," said he, "that thou make all things according to the pattern showed to thee in the mount." Hebrews 8:4-5. This divine testimony affirms that the ministrations of the terrestrial priests served as mere reflections of Christ's exalted priesthood. The evidence is unmistakably represented by the divine mandate given to Moses to craft the tabernacle congruent to the blueprint unveiled to him on the mount. This unequivocally identifies the pattern presented to Moses with the sanctuary or authentic tabernacle in heaven, where our Lord administers his services, as delineated in Hebrews 8:2. The scripture continues to elucidate, the Holy Ghost this signifying, that the way into the holiest of all was not yet revealed, while the first was yet standing, which was a figurative representation for the time then extant. Hebrews 9:8-9. While the inaugural tabernacle remained and the initial covenant was efficacious, the ministration of the superior tabernacle had not, unsurprisingly, commenced. Yet, when Christ arrived as a high priest of auspicious things yet to transpire, when the primitive tabernacle had fulfilled its duty and the first covenant had expired, Christ, elevated to the throne of the majesty in the heavens as a minister of the genuine sanctuary, entered by his own blood, verse 12, into the holy place, that is, the heavenly sanctuary. Accordingly, the original tabernacle served as a symbolic representation of the temporal period. Should further testimony be required, the writer of Hebrews articulates, in verse 23, of the terrestrial tabernacle, with its compartments and implements, as patterns of celestial objects. And in verse 24, he labels the holy locales constructed by human hands, that is, the terrestrial tabernacles and temples of ancient Israel, figures of the real one, that is, of the tabernacle in heaven. This perspective is further reinforced by the revelations disclosed to John. Among the celestial visions he was privileged to witness in heaven were 7 lamps of fire, incandescent before the throne, Revelation 4:5, an altar of incense and a golden censer, Revelation 8:3, and the Ark of God's Testament, Revelation 11:19. All of these were viewed in conjunction with a temple in heaven, Revelation 1:19, 15, 8. These articles, immediately recognizable to every Bible reader as the appurtenances of the sanctuary, were exclusive to it and employed in the associated ministrations. Their very existence is indebted to the sanctuary, and thus, wherever they are found, one can conclude that the sanctuary is present. Consequently, the fact that John beheld these objects in heaven after Christ's ascension testifies to the existence of a sanctuary in heaven, and that he was granted the privilege to witness it. Despite any initial reservations, the amassed testimonies presented are incontrovertibly adequate to substantiate this fact. The Bible pronounces the tabernacle of Moses as the sanctuary of the inaugural covenant. Moses recounts that God unveiled to him a design in the mount, according to which he was to construct this tabernacle. The book of Hebrews confirms that Moses indeed created it in alignment with the blueprint, and that this pattern was the true tabernacle in heaven, which was the Lord's creation, not man's. And that of this heavenly sanctuary, the tabernacle built by human hands, was an accurate representation or figure. Lastly, to reinforce the scriptural affirmation that this sanctuary is located in heaven, John provides eyewitness testimony that he indeed observed it there. What further evidence could one possibly solicit? In terms of defining the sanctuary, we now have an impeccably unified portrayal. The sanctuary of the Bible, note this with emphasis, embodies initially the prototypical tabernacle erected by the Hebrews during their exodus from Egypt, which was the sanctuary of the first covenant. Secondly, it encompasses the authentic tabernacle in heaven, of which the former was a model or figure, the sanctuary of the new covenant. These elements are inextricably linked as type and antitype. From the antitype we return to the type, and from the type we are naturally and inevitably propelled to the antitype. In this manner, we discern how a sanctuary service has been provisioned from the Exodus to the conclusion of probation. Indisputably, the term sanctuary, as referenced by Daniel, would have instantly conjured up the image of the sanctuary of his people in Jerusalem, an image easily recognized by any individual at the time of its existence. However, the question arises, does the declaration from Daniel 8:14 pertain to this particular sanctuary? The answer depends entirely upon the timeline in question. Declarations regarding the sanctuary, which were applicable during the era of ancient Israel, would naturally refer to the sanctuary of that epoch, whereas those declarations that apply under the Christian era must inevitably refer to the sanctuary of this period, namely the New Covenant sanctuary in heaven. Whether the 2300 days, marking the culmination of which the sanctuary would be cleansed, ended prior to Christ, determines whether the sanctuary to be cleansed was the one from that period. Should they extend into the Christian era, then the sanctuary in reference must be that of this epoch, the New Covenant sanctuary in heaven. Determining this point hinges solely on further deliberation of the 2300 days, an exploration found within the commentary on Daniel 9:24, where the subject of time is revisited and expounded. Turning our attention to the purification of the sanctuary, it must be noted that our discussions hitherto regarding the sanctuary have merely served as a preamble to the crux of the prophecy, the purification of the sanctuary. Unto 2300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Before delving into the intricacies of the purification process, it was paramount to identify the constituents of the sanctuary, which we are now prepared to investigate. Having delineated the components of the sanctuary, discerning the nature of its cleansing and the mechanisms of its execution becomes significantly simpler. It has been previously established that any entity defined as the sanctuary must have a correlated service referred to as its cleansing. Such a service is indeed affiliated with the institution we have identified as the sanctuary and is termed its cleansing in reference to both the earthly edifice and the heavenly temple. Do the readers balk at the notion of anything celestial requiring purification? The book of Hebrews unequivocally affirms the purification of both the terrestrial and celestial sanctuaries. Almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without shedding of blood is no remission. It was therefore necessary that the patterns of things in the heavens should be purified, Greek, katharizistai, cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves cleansed with better sacrifices than these. Hebrews 9:22-23. This may be paraphrased thus in light of the aforementioned discussions. It was therefore necessary that the tabernacle erected by Moses, with its sacred vessels, which were patterns of the true sanctuary in heaven, should be cleansed with the blood of calves and goats. But the heavenly things themselves, the sanctuary of the Christian era, the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched, and not man, must be cleansed with superior sacrifices, even with the blood of Christ. Next, we probe into the nature of this cleansing and its mode of execution. According to the just quoted text, it is achieved by means of blood. The cleansing is not from physical impurities or contamination, as blood is not an agent typically employed for such purposes. This reasoning should assuage any apprehension regarding the purification of heavenly entities. The notion that heavenly objects are to be cleansed does not signify physical impurities in heaven, as this is not the type of cleansing delineated in the scriptures. The rationale provided for employing blood for this purification is that, sans the shedding of blood, there is no remission or forgiveness of sin. The purification is from sin. The concept of sin remission and the expurgation of sin is the fundamental task to be undertaken. Hence, the cleansing process refers not to physical purification, but to purification from sin. But how did sin become associated with the sanctuary, either earthly or heavenly, such that it requires cleansing? This question is elucidated by the ministerial rites associated with the archetype, to which we now turn our attention. The closing chapters of Exodus provide us with a detailed account of the construction of the earthly sanctuary and the associated service arrangements. Leviticus commences with an account of the ministerial rites to be conducted therein. We aim to highlight a specific branch of the service here. The individual who had committed a sin would bring a live animal offering to the door of the tabernacle. He would briefly lay his hand on the head of this creature and presumably confess his sins over it. By this symbolic act, he acknowledged his sin and deserving of death, but substitutes his own punishment with his offering, thereby transferring his guilt to it. He then personally takes the life of the animal. The law required the life of the transgressor for his disobedience. Life is contained in the blood. Leviticus 17:11-14. Hence, without the shedding of blood, there can be no remission. However, with the shedding of blood, remission becomes a possibility, as the law's demand for a life is thus fulfilled. The blood of the offering, representing a forfeited life and carrying its guilt, was then taken by the priest and presented before the Lord. Through his confession, through the sacrifice of the innocent creature, and through the priest's holy service, an individual's sin was divested from him and vested into the sacred sanctuary. Such victims were offered in a continual stream by the multitude of the faithful. Day after day, the cycle of penitence and redemption continued, transforming the sanctuary into the vessel that bore the collective sins of the congregation. Yet this was not the ultimate fate of these sins. The amassed guilt was purged in a distinct service dedicated to the cleansing of the sanctuary. This solemn service, symbolized by the ritual, took place annually on the 10th day of the 7th month, known as the Day of Atonement. On this sacred day, as all of Israel abstained from work and humbly reflected on their sins, the priest would present 2 goats before the Lord at the threshold of the tabernacle. Lots were cast upon these goats, one for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. The goat chosen by the Lord's lot was then sacrificed, and its blood carried by the priest into the innermost sanctum of the sanctuary to be sprinkled on the mercy seat. This was the sole day when such a holy act was permitted. Emergent from the Holy of Holies, the priest was then to lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over him Within the typology, in order to purify the sanctuary, the high priest entered the Holy of Holies to minister before God in the presence of his Ark of the Covenant. In the antitype, when the hour arrives for the purification of the true sanctuary, our high priest enters the Holy of Holies once and for all to bring his intercessory work on behalf of humanity to its final end. Esteemed reader, do you now grasp the import of this topic? Do you begin to fathom the sanctuary of God as an object of profound interest for all of humanity? Do you discern that the entire scheme of salvation revolves around it, and that once its purpose is fulfilled, the period of probation concludes, and the fate of the saved and the lost is irrevocably determined? Do you understand that the cleansing of the sanctuary is a brief, specific task by which the grand plan of salvation is brought to a permanent end? Do you realize that if we can ascertain when the work of purification begins, we will know when the final epoch of salvation has arrived, when the most solemn declaration of prophecy is due to the world? Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. Revelation 14:7. This is precisely what the prophecy aims to illuminate. It marks the commencement of this momentous task. Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. The celestial sanctuary is the place where all judgments are to be delivered. The progress of the work within it should be humanity's paramount concern. If individuals comprehended how these topics bear upon their eternal destinies, they would devote to them their most meticulous and prayerful study. And it came to pass, when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. As we delve into the interpretation of the vision, we recall the profound yearning Daniel harbored to comprehend these revelations. He fervently pursued their meaning. Immediately, there materialized before the prophet an entity with the likeness of a man. Daniel perceived the sound of a man's voice, the resonance of an angel uttering human speech. A decree was issued to illuminate Daniel on the nature of the vision, a command directed towards Gabriel, a name that translates to the strength of God, or man of God. This celestial being continued to impart wisdom to Daniel in the 9th chapter. Centuries hence, this very angel was selected to announce the birth of John the Baptist to his father Zacharias, and the advent of the Messiah to the Virgin Mary, Luke 1:26. To Zacharias, Gabriel introduced himself thus, I am Gabriel, that stand in the presence of God, Luke 1:19. From this, it is evident that Gabriel was here addressed by an entity of a higher echelon, an entity with the authority to command and oversee his work. This individual was likely the archangel, Michael, he who is like God is, Christ. So he came near where I stood, and when he came I was afraid, and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and set me upright, and he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed, the end shall be. Daniel's prostration before the celestial visitor was not an act of worship, for the veneration of angels is explicitly forbidden. See Revelation 19:10, 22, 8-9. Instead, it appears Daniel was simply overawed by the grandeur of the heavenly emissary. He cast himself downward, his visage pressed to the earth. The angel in turn extended his hand, a gesture of reassurance and comfort. How often have divine entities implored mortals to fear not? And from this humbled and prostrate state, Daniel was helped to rise. The angel initiates the interpretation of the vision with an overarching proclamation that in the appointed time, the end shall come, and he will unveil to Daniel what shall be in the last end of the indignation. The indignation presumably spans a significant period, but which epoch does it denote? God had declared to his chosen Israel that his indignation would befall them due to their wickedness. Thus, he decreed about the profane, wicked prince of Israel, remove the diadem and take off the crown. I will overturn it, and it shall be no more, until he come whose right it is, and I will give it him. Ezekiel 21:25, 27:31. This decree delineates the era of God's indignation against his covenant people, the era during which the sanctuary and its host would be trodden underfoot. The diadem was removed, the crown was seized when Israel was subjugated to the Babylonian kingdom. It was overturned by the Medes and Persians, then by the Grecians, and yet again by the Romans, each overthrow echoing the threefold repetition of the term by the prophet. Having rejected Christ, the Jews were subsequently dispersed across the world. Spiritual Israel supplanted the literal descendants, yet they remained subjected to earthly powers until the re-establishment of David's throne. Not until the rightful heir, the Messiah, the Prince of Peace, arrives will this subjugation cease. The angel now proceeds to reveal to Daniel the events set to unfold in the concluding phase of this era of indignation. The ram which thou saw having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. As the disciples once remarked upon the Lord's clarity of speech, we too can acknowledge the angel who engaged with Daniel, exclaiming, "Behold, you now communicate with lucidity, absent of riddles." The elucidation of the vision is proffered in a language free from obscurity. See remarks on verses 3, 8. The defining characteristic of the Persian Empire, the fusion of 2 distinctive nations, finds representation in the dual horns of the ram. Greece, under the stewardship of the world-renowned general, Alexander the Great, achieved its pinnacle of splendor as a unified entity. This epoch of her history is embodied in the initial manifestation of the goat, during which the single, prominent horn symbolized Alexander himself. Upon his untimely demise, his empire fragmented but swiftly coalesced into 4 substantial sectors, epitomized by the goat's subsequent phase when 4 horns emerged in the stead of the broken original horn. These divisions, however, did not possess the original kingdom's might. They did not stand in his power. These historical landmarks, which have been the subject of extensive historical discourse, are succinctly encapsulated by the inspired writer in these few potent lines, creating a sharp outline with a mere handful of pen strokes. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes, but he shall be broken without hand. The power depicted here comes to fruition in the latter days of the 4 sectors of the goat's dominion, that is, as the reign draws towards its denouement. Unquestionably, this is identical to the little horn delineated in verse 9 and the subsequent verses, interpreted as Rome, as elucidated in commentary on verse 9, and everything is congruous and comprehensible. A moniker, such as a king of fierce countenance, aligns with the portents of retribution prophesied by Moses to befall the Jews from this very power, referring to it as a nation of fierce countenance. Deuteronomy 28, 49, 50. Few, if any, nations presented a more imposing spectacle in their martial attire than the Romans. As for the concept of understanding dark sentences, Moses, in the aforementioned scripture, prophesies, "Whose tongue thou, the Jews, shall not understand." This could not be attributed to the Babylonians, Persians, or Greeks in relation to the Jews, as the Chaldean and Greek tongues were not entirely alien to Palestine. Such, however, was not the case with Latin. When does the phrase "come to the full" apply to transgressors? Throughout the narrative, the relationship between God's chosen and their oppressors is consistently referenced. It was due to the transgressions of his people that they were sold into bondage. Their persistent sinfulness resulted in increasingly severe punishments. The Jews, as a collective, were never more morally decadent than when they fell under Roman jurisdiction. Papal Rome, though mighty but not by his own power, owed a substantial part of its success to the support of allies and internal strife among foes, circumstances which it was always prepared to exploit. Likewise, Papal Rome wielded power through spiritual dominion over the secular powers. "He shall destroy wonderfully" suggests an eerie fulfillment of God's prophecy to the Jews through Ezekiel, that he would consign them to men adept in destruction, Ezekiel 21:31. The horrifying massacre of 1,100,000 Jews during the Roman siege and fall of Jerusalem attests to the chilling accuracy of the prophet's words. Rome, in its subsequent papal phase, was accountable for the death of countless martyrs. "Through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand," is a trait for which Rome has been conspicuously renowned, exceeding all other powers in a policy of deceit, thereby enabling it to dominate nations. This holds true for both pagan and papal Rome, thus causing destruction through semblances of peace. Ultimately, Rome, represented by one of its governors, dared to stand in opposition to the Prince of Princes, pronouncing a death sentence on Jesus Christ. However, the prophecy concludes with the assurance that he shall be broken without hands. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true, wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted, and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up, and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. The phrase, "the vision of the evening and the morning," alludes to the span of 2,300 days. Confronted with the protracted era of subjugation and the impending adversities due to befall his people, Daniel was overcome, succumbing to faintness and infirmity for a series of days. He found himself confounded by the vision, its meaning eluding his grasp. Why then, one might wonder, did Gabriel not fully execute his mandate, enabling Daniel to comprehend the vision in its entirety? The answer, undoubtedly, lies in the fact that Daniel had already reached the limit of what he could endure at that juncture. Thus, any further elucidation was necessarily postponed to a later date. Within the complex web of foresight, Daniel 8 has guided us along a labyrinth filled with symbols and significance. From the clash of the ram and the goat to the mysterious horn, we've traversed through epochs to decode truths that resonate still. The journey towards comprehension is far from over. Looming ahead lies a more profound mystery, veiled in ambiguity and contention. The 70 weeks of Daniel 9. This enigmatic prophecy, the most misinterpreted in all of Christian belief, calls to us, and the answers are poised to be unveiled. Come with us into the next installment as we explore further the depths of faith, chronicles of history, and the paths of destiny.